Against, that's carried. Thank you very much. Okay, item 8. Dave, you so this is to approve a process for a review of the Three Waters delivery as per section 17A review. We had some questions from last month, which I believe have been answered, but I'll put it. Phil, do you?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move option 2, please.
Thank you. That's noted. Phil, did you have any further questions or need clarification?
Yes, I do, and thank you, Dave, for providing the information. That I know that I have just circulated that at the beginning of the meeting to all councillors. What you sent me. Thank you. I've got a question. It's a number of questions, but one, I'm just wondering why, in fact, in this report, which is all about water, we haven't referred it already to cultural values and our treaty relationship with and practice with Ngāi Tahu.
I think you'll find that the section 17A review, what we're talking about at a governance level, at a funding level, at a service delivery, will bring that in the detail, and we will, I would say, Ngāi Tahu would be a major stakeholder, as would ECAN and a number of people. So as part of the detailed process, they would be identified stakeholders that would be talked about as we go through. Certainly we have a lot of discussions over Three Waters with Ngāi Tahu, and we see them as an important partner. And I suppose this report we've put together is a high level, trying to give us some detail about what direction you'd like us to go, and then we will put some more flesh on the bones about the terms of reference and the specific procedure that you'd go through to come through. What we're looking at is what is the council's direction they would like us to go before we do that, but certainly we would see them, as we'd see major environmental groups as major stakeholders. There's a huge number of stakeholders. Ministry of Health, obviously, drinking water assessor, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah, I guess what I'll say later is that this will be good to have them in at the early stage, and really, why not at the early stage?
That would be the case. No matter which option was taken, that would still be the case. Yeah.
So my other questions, if I may, I just wondered, in the cons or the disadvantages, I guess, of the different options, including option 2, the main option. Disadvantage of option 2 you've listed is the potential challenge finding appropriate people for an independent board. So I'm just wondering, isn't that more of a challenge and something that would have to be taken on with all of the options rather than being a disadvantage to any in particular?
You'll see it's a disadvantage in the top option as well. It is a disadvantage because in one, depending on how big you wanted that independence governance board, but if you were wanting 3 independents, we would be trying to find 3 independents that we were happy with, that had enough knowledge, 1, of Christchurch, 2, of water supply, that sort of thing. Obviously, option 2, we're still looking for some level of independence. So if you have a look, that disadvantage is carried into both those top options. If that governance board was sitting internally, as with option 3, where it's sitting, it's not as big a challenge.
Yeah. So, and my last question, if I may, Dave, is around the concept of independence and the whole independent delivery thing. How valid is that really? Like, in terms of any assessor, how in doing an inquiry, how independent are they, or truly independent are they, or how much is this a degree of perception?
I suppose, well, yeah, independence, there is an element of reality versus perception, there's no doubt. You know, if we went for option 2, for example, it would be a decision on whether you would have, you could have a board of 3 or you could have one of 5. If you put more councillors in there than independents, it would probably be seen less independent than vice versa. The issue that we're saying is this is to supply you, one of the outcomes is to supply you for information to have a informed discussion with the Crown, depending on what they come out with in December. And the reason we're recommending the independence is it just gives you better grounds for that conversation with the Crown. I'm not saying the Crown would necessarily dismiss a non-independent report, but I think they're more likely to, and that was the really big reason we have fallen on the ground of the independents to help us support our argument or support our discussion. It might not be an argument, we might all align, but I think it might be a little bit. So that was really the reason for that independence, the main driver.
Just
Okay, so I've got Sarah and
Thank you. The timeframes for completing this work, would they be different between option 1 and option 2, and how long is that likely to take?
I wouldn't have imagined the options would be that different. You're going to have to engage with various stakeholders. We're going to have to come back to you, I presume, unless you delegate it to staff, of course, with the final terms of reference, things like that. So I wouldn't have imagined any of the options would take much longer or lesser time. I think my staff are telling me that what we've put in there is reasonably optimistic, really. Things always take longer, particularly trying to engage with the 10 other local authorities. Plus also we think, we've had a couple of workshops with Wellington Water, for example, and we think it's worth us also, as part of this review, talking with Wellington Water and with Watercare, because they are the two authorities that are delivering water on the same scale that we are. And there may be some synergies around them as much as geographical.
Yeah, and if we were to have councillors on the governance board, the process would probably be for us to vote on who that would be?
Well, you would have to decide how you were appointing them, whether they would come from the ITI committee, whether they'd come from this committee. That's a decision, well, depending on what you told us to do, we would probably come back to your next meeting with more detail and a recommendation about how they would be.
But the time frame's likely to go right through into the election period and potentially past that.
That's one of the reasons we've said it's quite a substantial report, and we're not sure it's good to land it right on the middle of the elections. So that's why we think, basically it's probably too short to do it before the elections, and I wouldn't want it to land on the first council meeting after the elections, really.
And one last thing, if we were using, so option 2 has that internal resource being used as a sort of cash cost saving, but it does mean that staff who are working in the Three Waters already, which is very stretched and under a lot of pressure and doing a lot of work, would need to come off that to do that work. How much? If you have a look at it, come from?
Teresa did the last one for us, and basically she. While she's an internal resource, she's actually independent of Three Waters. But don't get me wrong, she did have to get a lot of information from Three Waters as doing. So it will be putting additional resources right across. But I would say even if we got an independent person, they would have to get a lot of information out of the organisation anyway.
But if we have sort of some FTE resource, they're coming from somewhere in the organisation and they're already doing some work, that would have to be deferred, potentially on climate change.
And I think in that option 2, that little supplementary email that has been circulated, I have said there that there may be supplementary resources. And last time, help me here, we had PwC, or no? Yes. Someone helped us, just to crunch numbers, to do that sort of thing. So we did get some additional resource outside to do the last Section 17A review for Three Waters.
Yeah, the three options that we put forward are quite kind of crude, and within them, I mean, effectively we kind of did number 3 last time, but we did have PwC doing the numbers for us. Great. So, and in terms of resourcing, it really wouldn't make that much difference. The biggest thing I think on the overall time frame would actually be getting the governance and getting the right people in place. So options 1 and 2 would probably be around the same amount of time. We would require the same internal support regardless. Yeah. It would just be that internal independent person that that person would have the biggest impact that you wouldn't have on option 1. Because you'd have a person like me doing it that is currently allocated to something else. Okay,
but Dave, for you, that potential politicisation of the process by using councillors, especially over an election period, you think would mean that the minister is less likely to listen to the information that we bring forward?
again, it's a perception rather, you know,
That's
look, I
right.
can't actually say what the Minister will consider and not consider.
No.
We are just saying that potentially if you gave a bit of advice and it came back and, look, every option, no matter what you do around governance, funding and service delivery, will have pros and cons. And it depends on what you weight those pros and cons. We might give you a recommendation that says financially this is the best option, but you may want to say, well, I'm sorry, we're not interested in that. We're interested in what gives
Other
the best
outcomes.
community outcome or what gives the
Yep.
best environmental outcome. And they may not be the same options. So, yeah.
Great, thanks.
Vicky?
Thank you. By the Canterbury region in here, can you, you said 10 local authorities, just tell us what they are?
When we talk about the region, we're talking about everyone that's in the mayoral forum, and that goes right down to Waimate.
So Waimate to Kaikoura, the area of each.
So timing-wise, it's slightly unfortunate with this meeting because there's a chief executives meeting that would be maybe in the next couple of days where DIA is providing a workshop, and I think that is going to scope up the regional work better. So for us, we wouldn't want to duplicate the work that they are doing, but it's really important to link in with it.
So we're looking at the possibility of the Canterbury region, those 10 local authorities, from Waimate to Kaikoura.
Basically, it's an option. And we're just saying you're going to have to put some sort of option in there, because if you have a look at the Section 17A review, it talks about, and look, I'm not sure exactly words it is in here, actually, collaborating with your neighbours or looking at the options of collaborating with your neighbours. And so we've just floated a model of the Canterbury, because quite a bit of work's been done on that, quite a bit of statistics is already available on that. But yes, the government it might not be an option that they come up, might not be an option that we want, but basically there's a million different options out there. We've got to sort of float one to sort of be a bit of a benchmark to give us a feel.
So Waimate's become a neighbour now, okay.
Sorry.
It's all right. Just the other question in relation to that came up last time, in relation to a 17A review, why couldn't we just look at the funding and service delivery as opposed to the governance options?
You can decide, and you know, if you decide to do that, you will have to then grant yourself an exemption, and basically on the grounds as set out in the report. What we're saying is if you look at that option, it probably won't give you the information to have an informed conversation with the Crown. And it'd be fair to say that, well, the indications we're getting at the moment is the Crown is looking potentially at maybe some amalgamation of units. Yes. Whether it involves, you know, whether they say we're big enough or not. So basically it won't then give you any information to have a conversation with some facts and figures in front of you.
Let's explore the possibilities of this and just tell me where I've got this wrong. So say, for example, there's an independent review of this and we look at the 10 local authorities and they say there's actually economies of scale for 9 of those local authorities if we create a separate local entity, some sort of separate entity, which means that the Three Waters from Christchurch is divorced from the Christchurch City Council. Yep. Haven't we just done the government's work for them in terms of us losing a function that is absolutely integrated to roadworks, community development, every other possibility? Isn't that the risk of this?
I think the risk, and the reason we've put the cost effectiveness in is that potentially, depending on how they fund it, governance and funding, one doesn't necessarily follow the other. But if they said, look, we're going to now bring you in a uniform annual charge, you would have the information of what it would cost your ratepayers. You would also have the information on, you know, Three Waters is a third of our business. If you look financially, you would have some information on what would be the impact potentially on this organisation, so you could not only have an intelligent conversation with the Crown, but you could have an informed community as well, and they may have a say on what they feel. Well, but at the moment we haven't done that work.
Let's be clear on this. So the community don't get any say in the 17A review, do they? And the community...
We will go out to key stakeholders. So
but that's not 400,000 people. Okay, and in terms of the government proposal that's likely to come in December, the communities had no input on that.
Well, if the government decides to do it, they're going to have to put through legislation. So basically there will be a public process. I would suggest, and someone may, suggest differently, that if they decided to go down there, I imagine that's a 2-year process of getting that legislation through. I think it will be a large public process, because I think it's getting to the core of local democracy.
Absolutely.
LGNZ's not going to, they're going to take it seriously, and I think we are. So
I couldn't agree with you more, Dave.
Can we get back to the review of our three waters?
That it goes to the core of local democracy and to the functions of local government. Right. So the example you gave just before of Riccarton Road, of doing all the processes at once, the three waters, the roading, the bus lanes, the tree planting, everything, is exactly why we have local government as it is. Why would we do the government's work for them in looking at a governance model such as water care or anything else that is separated and distinct from the services that the city provides? Why would we do that?
We're not doing their work, we are doing the work so that we're in an informed position of what those potentially could look like. That's what we're recommending here, rather than doing the work for them. They will be looking, I would suggest to you, they're looking at a variety of different models, but at some point you are going to have some independent advice. You could do that, get it through legal privilege and do that, but someone's still going to have to crunch those numbers behind thing, and this we felt was a good way, and I think that's why it was initially floated.
How would it be if we crunched the numbers on all the things, looked at service delivery and the very best way in which we do that, but do not look at a different governance model that is separate from local government for the Christchurch City Council?
And to do that, you would give yourself an exemption to 17A, because you wouldn't be doing a 17A review.
For that function, for that component, the governance function.
I think you either give yourself an exemption or you don't give your exemption. You can't actually say, I'll partly comply with the legislation. You either comply with the legislation or you don't.
Is that actually true?
Well, that's just...
Help me here, Ian.
Is that the case?
I haven't got to,
I would prefer legal advice. Although I may not.
So Vicky, also we wouldn't have, the reason that it would be useful to do is for the preparedness as a region. And although you've spoken about creating effectively a large CCO water authority across the region, that's just one option that would need to be looked at as part of a review. The reason for doing it, though, is more preparedness. And there are many ways in which the local authorities could work together more effectively that don't require a governance change.
Absolutely.
But you still need to include governance as part of the review.
Well, let's just clarify.
They are separate.
Well, let's just clarify whether we do actually need to do all parts of the 17A review, or whether governance, whether we can just accept that, sure, local authorities can work together more effectively. No problem. But do we need to look at a separate authority that deals with the three waters?
I think I'm with David on this one.
Yeah, have to do them all.
I think you would have to do them all. That's what the section really implies.
Yeah.
So I don't think you can break it down. You're either doing it or you're not. So yeah. I mean, what you're saying may come out of may be a result of the review anyway.
Yeah.
I mean,
okay,
it could be included.
Been answered.
The actual legislation says if you do a section 17A, it must include, basically, I've got it under section 4, must include options for governance. So the CCO is only one option that needs to be considered. We will be considering as part of the options the status quo, and we will be considering, look, I did a tour of England a while ago after the waters were established, and I must admit I visited, whoops, I've broken something here, visited local authorities rather than water companies, and one of the biggest things, and Inverness was one of the cities I did visit, they found that the water companies were then dictating development patterns because of infrastructure.
Amazing.
Well, that will be one of the things that will come in as a strength.
Can you stop?
Correct.
This conversation is great, but actually we have a whole lot of people with questions to ask relevant to this conversation. Okay, Glenn.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rep. Just this whole thing about, and look at the options, David, about risk. Like, I'm trying to determine where it's ground, or in what it is ground. I mean, that's simply a view, isn't it, over risk or perceived risk. And, you know, you're entitled to your view, but it's simply a view. I mean, the risk over bias, to me, potentially exists in all those options. So that's simply a conclusion.
It's because it's being done internally. I mean, I did it, I was the author,
Yeah.
and I believe that I did it in an independent way. I don't believe that I show bias, obviously.
Yeah.
But it's that concept of independence.
Yeah.
One of the reasons for doing it would be
Yeah.
to ensure that there isn't bias.
But it's
We're
also
still human.
true, we've already declared a bias because we want to do this ourselves for different reasons rather than with the other TAs.
And so will they. They're not going to want to
No.
either.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Andrew?
Thank you. Dave, thanks very much indeed for sending out these notes which have recently been circulated. Under the heading option 2, how it would work in practice, there are a number of things that need to be determined. The terms of reference, and there's a suggestion that that could either be delegated presumably to staff or otherwise to a subcommittee. Some decisions that need to be made around the makeup and numbers of people on a governance board, who a councillor or councillors would be, who the independent appointments would be, and then obviously some other work which looks operational, and identification of a peer reviewer. Now, are you suggesting, and I think I may have heard a suggestion as part of an answer to a previous question, that you would bring a further report back to next month's committee meeting so that we can determine all of those things? So approve the terms of reference, determine the makeup of the governance board, probably even down to named people, and identification of the peer reviewer? Or do you want some guidance in today's resolution so that you can get on with that work?
I would like to know what your expectations were. Basically, and that's why I put delegation. I was sort of, it could be a subgroup of this committee, or it could come back as a full report. Basically, it's going to take us a wee while. It doesn't matter which option basically you choose. We are going to have to still define or refine the terms of reference. What you've got there is a draft. We are going to have to talk about who are the major stakeholders. We're going to have to put a bit more detail in there, and I wouldn't mind a guidance from the committee about whether they would like that brought back here for your final approval, whether you are happy to delegate it to a smaller group of councillors. I'm not sure we'll make much more progress by the time, well, we probably could maybe save a week or so by doing that, because we then wouldn't have to put it into an agenda that gets advertised X amount of times. But basically it's going to take a wee while for the team to pull that together anyway. So I would like some guidance of what your expectations of the next steps would be.
So if we asked for a report to come back to this committee at its next meeting, that would be a time frame that you could work in?
I think we could do that for, depending on what you wanted in the report, obviously, but for the final terms of reference to be approved, some guidance around the independent. But I would like to say, you know, let's consolidate on one option, and we will bring the detail about that one option, rather than you asking us a detail for 5 options and we bring back the detail of 5 options. So we're asking for a guidance on what the option is, and then, yes, probably the next steps, if we could bring one option back to you with the detail, that would be...
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you just put number 5, bring a report back to council. Okay, were there any other questions? Yanni.
Yeah, so I couldn't quite tell from the report where the Merrill Forum and the Chief Executive work got to. So I was just wondering if you could just highlight that.
Sorry, we can answer? Oh, I think the Mayor would probably be in a better position. My understanding is that there's a Chief Executives Forum in the next couple of days, or maybe it's on Monday, and DIA is coming into that meeting to run a workshop. The outcomes of that should give the region sufficient information to continue with their Three Waters work programme, and that should then guide any additional work that we would need to do. It could be all covered off. The regional side could be covered off completely separately. So yeah, we don't want to duplicate that. That's the point. There is regional work. The regional work is not focused on how we can create a CCO. It's how the region can most effectively deliver water and how they can work together better. What the DIA should be doing is coming down and giving an indication of the outcomes of the Three Waters programme and what it's going to mean to our authority and the region as a whole. So we don't want to put in anything in the terms of reference and scope until we know how that's going. So is there anything that you can add to that?
So it says in our report that there was a subgroup, the Mayor and the Seas, to meet in late February, discuss a mayoral forum response to the proposals emerging from the Three Waters review. Has that response been done? Sorry, the section I'm looking at, I don't know where it says, maybe I've missed it in the previous.
We've added a comment that's been specifically provided by the Secretariat that does that Three Waters review. So
there's
it
a
contained
workshop regionally. I guess what I'm really interested in under 4, sorry, it's what the recommendations have changed, but 4. So just when you measure the cost effectiveness of the Canterbury region, is that going to be cost effectiveness for us as a council and for our ratepayers? Or is it going to be for all the councils within our region? Because it seems to me it would be it's two different sort of...
The reason why, that one was added in very specifically to increase the scope. So the Section 17A review is required to be the cost effectiveness for our council. That's why you do a Section 17A review. We put in that additional suggestion because of the fact that the central government is going to look at the region as a whole. So,
right, no, I understand that. But when it comes back to us, basically what you're saying is, I mean, if it's cost effective for the 9 other councils, but not cost effective for us, then what happens?
Well, then you make a decision on what's best for. I mean, it's more about, so the reason for that number 4 is just to be prepared. It's not to say that because it's better for our region as a whole, directly around finances, then it's the right way forward. It's just to crunch the numbers and to understand where we sit. But at the moment, the region has looked at some form of alignment of information, but they have not looked at what it would mean financially or across any other ways of assessing value. So the suggestion's in there purely for preparedness because the central government is looking at broader options.
So we basically do the work that central government are going to do?
No. So what we're suggesting is that the region is already looking at a work programme. If we consider that work programme is not sufficient for us to be sufficiently prepared for central government, then we need to add that in. That's it. So the primary purpose of a Section 17A is for us. There's a clear scope for that. David's put together a first terms of reference for it, but we also just need to be mindful of the central government work and being prepared. We don't want to duplicate, so we look at what the Mayor and Colleen as well, they're both on this subgroup. We look at what they're doing and then we see any gaps that we need to fill to make sure we're prepared for the central government's recommendations.
I don't know if we could change 4 to I just think the cost effectiveness for the Canterbury region, it just gives me concern. Maybe we could put it in a different way.
And the cost impact on the Christchurch
City Council.
I think the whole point
that
that
will certainly be part of that. What we've got to do is
coming from the government.
Well, I understand this, and for some of us who've been around long enough to see the elected ECAN get dismissed from the regional mayors, some of us have long memories and very real concerns about the way in which these things can sort of snowball into a big avalanche that erodes our local democracy, particularly for Christchurch City.
Okay.
So I just wondered whether, just around 4, I understand you're going to get the information around the cost of service delivery across the Three Waters, across the region. I think that absolutely makes sense. I just don't like having the fact that it should include the cost effectiveness for the Canterbury region without having greater clarity around actually, what we need to be mindful of as a city is what is the cost impact on us for these regional options.
And that certainly will be part of, if you have a look at the draft terms of reference, we are asking for all those options to come with a Christchurch City Council ratepayers perspective. So you will find, we'll find that, you know, I'll make $1 million to actually do it. The cost it falls to Christchurch City is 900,000. We would actually, in the old model, it would have only cost us 800,000. That would be part of that, but it would also, we've got...
The issue is that Yanni, and I agree with him, and I'm happy to put it in, would prefer to see that in Resolution 4, so after Canterbury, and the cost impact on the City Council.
Yeah.
Is that all right?
Correct, the same thing.
Yeah, it was more the cost impact for the Christchurch City region of the Canterbury regional delivery.
No, just cost impact on Christchurch City, yeah.
And that was certainly our intention.
Yeah, that was implicit, I suppose. We needed to keep the word cost effectiveness in there because that's the legislation. We're just quite clearly using that, and we want to add that in for Canterbury, just so that we've got.
But what's cost effective for the region?
No, yeah, we totally see that. Yeah,
for us.
Yeah. But that would have been clear in the review because the Section 17A has to show the cost effectiveness for Christchurch. So it was just implicit. There's no that adding that extra word is.
I know. It's just
well, no, but it doesn't change. It doesn't change it. So it's great to add
We're happy with
it.
it.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions?
Well, just so the DAA stuff that we've had previously, which seems quite confused around, you know, on one hand.
Yanni, questions on
so the DAA
this decision,
workshop.
right?
So I'm just the timing around this. I think it would be quite good just to get. And again, I raised this when we were having the water strategy thing. So we've got the issue of like water charging. We've got draft. The integrated water strategy. So there's just all these things happening in the water space that seem to be done in different levels, streams, etc. So I just appreciate that this work is going to happen. It's tied up with things like contract renewals and contract, processes. We've got the other wider water strategies that we're currently looking at, alongside coastal hazards as well, which I presume has an impact. So who's sort of bringing all that together?
That does all get included. When having done the review last time, if you're looking at what's best for the three waters, it has to understand the water strategy, it has to understand the coastal impacts, it has to look at all of that.
But we haven't done that work yet, so I'm just trying
we
to
don't duplicate the work, we just leverage off of
sequencing.
what's already been done. We're not going to redefine a water strategy, but the review takes into account all the excellent work that's been done so that it can come up with an overall understanding of recommendations on what's best.
So that work hasn't been done. We would just advise that we're doing a new program of work on it that isn't going to start to that.
I think there's a couple of things. We've brought this information back to you because you asked for it. And so you asked for an independent review, and so we've put this here. It will be aligned with the draft integrated water strategy that's being prepared at the moment. It'll be integrated with the water strategy, the water supply strategy that we're doing at the moment. So it'll incorporate that. But 90% of the work that's done was done very, very well 2 years ago, and so we'll build on the report that you've already seen. We won't throw the water out, the baby out with the bathwater. Sorry, we will be, building on that report, which will make this easier and cheaper. But there are some, obviously Havelock North's happened since then, and we need to make it absolutely relevant. And we've got potentially some hard conversations to have in the future.
Okay,
Right.
any other questions on this?
So just in regards to the issue of water charging, is that...
Yanni, no.
So we're not doing water charging
No.
to this? It won't look at it?
I don't think you've read the terms of reference for this report because it's absolutely crystal clear. Now, any other questions on what is being proposed here? Okay, so we have a resolution that's moved by Pauline. Pauline, are you happy with it?
Yes.
Okay, I'll foreshadow that if this is not passed, that we'll revert to option 1. Seconded Sarah. Okay, so if there's no further questions, we'll move into debate. Pauline, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, well, the reason I've moved to option 2 is, to me, it very well addresses everything that we're looking to do. It will have independent appointments. It's also a better place to take into account the potential or any potential impacts on council as a whole, rather than an external body. And also, option 2 will be independently reviewed, whereas option 1 is internally peer reviewed. And I think that that would actually address any perception of bias, in my view. And option 2 makes really good use of our existing knowledge and also the work that's already been done in the 2017 report as well, much easier. I'm just a bit worried about the scope of this thing on page 56 and 12.3, where it seems to begin with the premise that we'll consider the relative merits of opportunities and alternative arrangements for governance, funding and delivery, whereas it should be actually coming from the other end and determining how well the City Council is performing in this area for a start. So in the negatives, in the pros in the option 1 increases the opportunity for regional engagement. I and staff have actually expressed that there has been a reluctance for the other regions to come to the party and actually join in with some of their data, but in actual fact, when you think about it, it's to their advantage to do this, so that perhaps in option 2 we can just use a little bit more, do a little bit more work to engage them on that one, and I don't see that as a barrier at all. So we have seen also things in here like aggregation, CCAs and asset ownership, all muted in this report. I really do think we need governance involved here, and we need to work with the staff that we have on this, and as I said, to just build on the work that's already done in 2017. So that is why I think we should be supporting option 2.
Thank you very much. Glenn?
Thank you. I also support option 2. For me, this is a classic keep your eyes peeled situation, and I wrote a note before Vicky uttered her words before. I wrote down this is about local democracy. The elected reps of the city must be in the mix. So I'm backing up what Pauline has just said. We know already from our recent and further history of amalgamation, aggregation, the pluses and minuses, costs and benefits of all of that. We know about the erosion of local democracy. Elections and politics has been put up, but look, here's the thing. Politics is a constant. Election year or no election year, it's always on the go. We're either getting into election, coming out of one, or gearing up for another. I think we have to put it to one side and treat it a bit like Christmas as an artificial deadline and just get on with the work. We're here to do a job. Finally, what I would say is that to this number 5, it seems to me this would fall into in terms of governance, probably the right committee would be ITI, chaired by Pauline. Thank you.
Leanne?
I don't support this recommendation. I believe that we should have an independent review, and the reason is that government has been sending a message loud and clear for a very long time. I was at a meeting with the Minister of Local Government, and she said the status quo is not an option. So they're not going to consider the status quo as an option. They want us to work with our neighbours to find out whether there are other ways of delivery. A CCO is not the only way that you can cooperate locally in order to achieve a good outcome. I'm thinking if we were a unitary authority, as is Auckland, it would be a different situation. But here we have a regional council that covers an expansive region, and that's true. We have a Greater Christchurch partnership, which is actually the proximate area for water supplies. Issues that happen in our neighbours, our nearest neighbours, they reflect on us, and what's happened here in Christchurch reflects as well. The Minister has said we need to have the right conversation about the future of local government and Three Waters reform. I acknowledge there remains anxiety about Three Waters service delivery, but I want to encourage those in the sector who are already working towards improved service delivery that we want to engage. She has said that regions are being encouraged to look at their arrangements and that
it isn't about councils, it's about New Zealanders anywhere in the country being able to access clean water. I just think that we are doing ourselves and our city a great disservice if we don't provide an independent analysis of our three waters system so that we can sit at the table as equals with central government when it comes time to actually negotiate through a decision that they will announce in December. So they will announce a process for going forward. Yes, there will be an opportunity to have a say, but I'd much rather have a say now, and I'd rather have that input leading into that process. I'd rather have an independent report sitting with us to support us through that. And I really appreciate the advice that's come from staff to back up that position. Finally, we do have a meeting with with Department of Internal Affairs. I know that the Three Waters review is the subject of a Chief Executive's discussion with DIA, a workshop, and we've got a DIA representative coming back on the 14th of May. It's in all of your calendars, and I encourage you all to attend because this is going to happen to us if we don't get ahead of it.
Thank you. Jimmy?
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Thank you, staff, for providing the additional information, particularly on page 50 to 53. But if we review the page 52 and also the original page 42, this short list, we always highlight those cost effective regarding to this review. But if you review the option 1, option 2, and option 3, those disadvantage, we compare the particular option 1 and option 2, etc. I'm particularly concerned those disadvantage or cons we mentioned, how to mitigate those effect. For instance, like the Pauline, she mentioned, whether the council, regarding these three waters can take into account those positive outcome. But we receive the information from staff agencies not. If not, there's a risk for us regarding to this review. Second one is, if we, request engage independent doing this review only, but how about this first bullet point of this advantage? This option still requires significant internal technical report. If that's true, why in the early stage we can get involved, start involved the local Democrats Council review and also after the peer review, the independent review. That's quite a balance. Also regarding to the cost, if we review this 3-1, the first one even start mentioning 80K, but 80K is still from the repair. But option 2 is 35K. So option 1 is 2.3 times of the cost, etc. So regarding to this one, I remember last time also, would like to move the option 2. So today I have no change, my view.
Phil?
Thank you, Ref. And thank you for staff for giving us the additional information. I think this, and I'm very glad that we are able to debate and discuss this again and further to the last time it came to this committee. To me, this is an issue really that goes, in terms of having governance involvement, it goes basically back to our obligations, I believe, as elected members to actually fulfil our democratic requirements. This is probably the most important report that I can recall for a long time. And when Councillor Johansson referred before to ECAN being canned, I take that very seriously. I think this is essential that in governance we are involved with this right from the beginning. It's no, I can understand that in a big report, the important aspects, for example, like the involvement of Ngāi Tahu, our treaty partners, that they be involved, they should have been involved right from the beginning. Same with us. We need to be involved right from the beginning to make sure that this works well. I question the concept of it being truly independent in any one person. That it will, no matter what, there'll be a peer review anyway that we'll be able to comment on. There is clearly a perception around independence, which can be, I think, overrated. And there's every reason that if a working group work through this sensibly, that in fact central government will take serious notice of what this council would like to have. So, and there's no question how important this is. It is clear in the report that alternative arrangements for governance and funding and delivery are being made. That's what this is really about. And for us to leave out the governance part now and go with option 1 will be entirely wrong. So it's absolutely clear to me. There are examples before too when in fact governance should have been involved earlier on. The increased costs that blew out with the Akaroa wastewater project is an example where I believe if governance had been involved earlier on, we would have been able to give it a much better steer. And that was huge money. So is this. This is huge money involved for our whole council in the future, and important that we make the right decision and be involved.
Thank you, Phil. Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, option 2 provides, as it says in the table, a level of independence. I think it's important to note that option 2, as it's presented in that table, has got 1 councillor sitting at the governance table. That councillor will inevitably be in a minority, and we've got a paper coming to the next meeting of this committee where we will be making decisions about the overall number of people sitting around that table, and no doubt this will be something that will come into play as we consider that. But I would far rather have a councillor there at the table to make sure that there is a link between the work that's going on and what will be the final decision maker in terms of this council as to how we deal with that report when it lands, than a truly a report which is divorced from governance landing at this table, which may well then not be palatable to a majority of people sitting at the table. So I'd note that 1 has got a higher level of independence than 2, but note the comments in the table on page 42 that this provides a level of independence, and I think if this is done intelligently and well and everybody understands what their role is, we can produce a report which is capable of being respected as an independent report, but making sure that there is that all-important link between the work that's done for the report and the final decision maker, which may in fact lead to a level of confidence at this table as the ultimate decision maker around any recommendations or any proposals coming out of that report that may be more difficult to achieve with a report that didn't have that link with governance.
Sarah and then Yanni.
Thank you. I think it's really important to notice that that option 1 doesn't exclude governance input. It's really important. I think the comments so far have said that option 2 provides that governance input, and yet option 1, as Councillor Clearwater stated, has us in there right at the beginning. Option 1 has councillors setting the terms of reference for the work that happens. That's us right at the beginning. Terms of reference, similar to what we do with any of the other organisations that we ask to do work for us. We can also be part of the process. We can be interviewed, we can have that in the terms of reference, we can have input into the work that's happening to make sure that our views are heard at a governance level. But our goal is to convince central government that council is responsible enough and that it should be staying in charge of our 3 waters infrastructure, and that to do that we need to provide convincing evidence. That won't come if the government thinks that the whole process has been politicised, especially across an election campaign time. The other risk is that if we have a councillor or 2 involved in this group, and that councillor is then no longer a councillor come October, the work could be put back, there's a change, there's people getting up to speed, and it puts the process at risk. Water is political, and it's very clear that the government see water as being really political. They have set a very strong direction for where they think it should be going. We have set a clear direction and set clear expectations for our community as to where we think it should be going. The only way for us to be able to win that debate is to have better evidence. and that's why I'll be going for option 1.
Thank you, Yanni.
Thanks. Look, I mean, I've got concerns that we're even doing this. I think we just, but I can understand the reason behind it. We want to get ahead of the game and we want to be informed. So, I'm reluctant to support this, but I will support it. I do think 2 is good in terms of, I do think as councillors we're elected to provide governance to the city, and we should be involved in this significant thing. So I think that's really important. I do have strong concerns about how you weigh up the regional benefits versus the city benefits or impacts. And I think we just, hopefully as that work gets done, we can be really clear. In fact, as a city, we do have a good example where we've had an enforced amalgamation with the peninsula, and the cost to the city ratepayers has been massive. So, I think there's some evidence that we have locally that shows that actually the public don't get a say. The Christchurch citizens never got a say on that, and you can incur significant costs as a result. And so I just think we need to be really mindful that possibly the outcome of this will be that the impact on us as a city is far greater in terms of cost than to some of our smaller neighbouring councils. But I don't know what their views are, and they may have equally a desire to retain their core functions, which obviously the Three Waters is one of them. So let's get that work underway and find out. I do worry that the government in the past has relied on the Mayoral Forum and the chief executives as being indicative of a collective council position. So, I know we've got new people involved now, and I know that our mayor has previously been very clear about things need a mandate from the full council if they're to represent the council. So I just encourage that line of thinking to continue, because there is a risk that central government just sees select groups as being representative of a whole city, and that certainly is what occurred in the past, and let's hope and let's make it really clear that that should not happen in the future. The final point I want to make is this whole idea of independence. Many times we've got independent reviews, and you could argue that sometimes independent or private consulting companies equally have a bias towards certain outcomes. And time again we've had independent reviews which basically say, well, just look at putting things away from council control, it'll be more efficient. Even the Local Government New Zealand Funding Review discussion document raised the issue that water could be seen as being more effectively delivered like the electricity sector, and it made reference to the reforms for the electricity sector, which I would argue have been a disaster from a consumer point of view. You've just got whole other layers of private corporate interests that are making obscene profits at the expense of local people. And I think, the idea that you need something to be done privately to provide independence equally sometimes can have a bias built in. So that's why I think the hybrid model number 2 makes sense, and I would much rather go with that and have confidence in it than have something that I don't believe we'd have full oversight.
Thank you, Yanni. David?
Thank you. Look, I've looked at the pros and cons of option 1 and option 2, and I have to say I favour option 1, and I think one of my main reasons there is the removing the risk of perception of internal bias. And I've seen so many instances of terms of reference that really, in my opinion, have been set up to give you the outcome that desired. So I'm more in favour of a totally independent preparation. We have the option of coming back for internal peer review and input in that respect, but I think it leaves us more in a better position to get this work done in a manner that's acceptable to the wider community. So I would be supporting option 1.
Thank you. Vicky?
I'm quite willing to admit that I am completely biased on the subject of our Three Waters remaining within the function of the City Council. I don't have any difficulty about admitting that. I actually was on the Local Government Commission in the 1980s that reformed local government, and the 1989 reforms that got rid of the drainage boards, the catchment boards, the transport boards, the boards for everything. There was even a wallaby board in Waimate. There was a board literally for everything, and it literally meant that councils could do very little, even less than what they can do today. So I think it is complete insanity to look at separate authorities for your three waters. What the combination of functions in local government currently means is that you can actually make decisions about the future of your community and implement those decisions. If you rip the three waters out, as the government seems intent to do, then what you are effectively doing is giving huge decision-making powers to organisations that have quite different views on the world than the community that they pretend to serve. And the statements that Dave was about to make when he was stopped about how water authorities can determine the development of a city is absolutely right if you look at the outside, if you look at examples from outside. I have no difficulty with us working together. I have no difficulty with us talking with our neighbours, although I struggle with Waimate being quite neighbouring us. But let's be very clear about what the government is seeking to do, because as I read their statements and everything they've put out on this subject, they have a major problem with small local authorities who cannot afford the cost of their three waters, particularly in the South Island, the West Coast and its wastewater. So they have said quite openly that they need a bigger local authority to step up and help that authority. Well, I'm really not keen that that is the Christchurch City Council, given our current financial situation. We cannot afford the West Coast's wastewater problem. And having just spent about 10 years' money in 2 years on our current drinking water, we simply cannot afford that given our current finances. I don't want their wastewater problem for the community of Christchurch. I'm quite clear on that. I think actually the whole review at the moment is a wee bit difficult, and I don't want to review the governance. I accept reluctantly, although I don't agree with the legal advice that we have to, but I don't agree with option 1 in the so-called independent review. I have now seen God knows how many independent reviews of local government functions. Surprisingly, not surprisingly, every independent review of a local government function recommends that an independent board would be much more efficient, would do it better, and would be way, way better than any bureaucratic council could ever be. That will be the result of an independent review. I don't believe that, having seen the results of those.
Time's up, Vicky.
Okay, so I'm willing to support this reluctantly, but option 2.
Thank you. Dion.
Yeah, I've just been listening to a few of the things, and I will support option 1 as well. The reason that I will support that is because option 1 and option 2, in my opinion, ultimately are going to end up the same. But the pros... I'm still getting heckled, and I'm still getting advocated over this side. I've actually got the two of them in between me. I'm like feeling a little bit out of place right now. But no, I mean, the reason that I will support option 1 is actually I believe we do have a serious problem in New Zealand and in Christchurch. And I'm willing to trust that an independent, a truly independent preparation and governance in this case will remove the political risks that we have currently over top of us in this review that's impending from the government, and that's the reason that I'd support option 1, and it's really for the reasons that that were said before, so I won't reiterate that. But I'm actually not sure that, you know, in number 4 up there, I'm actually a little bit concerned. The reference was made to the wastewater system on the West Coast, but I'm not sure the regions can afford our impending freshwater problem that we've got, our potable water problem that we've got. 57 million. We've got a report here. $57 million for 3% of the network that was replaced under SCIRT. That's a potential $2 billion problem that the city And maybe if the region gets to help us with that, who knows? But no, we've got a big problem here in our city. We need to sort that out. I want to get the advice. I trust that the staff will be able to peer review that and independently give us good advice. And I know that we will have, we will be involved right from the beginning. And I've had that assurance from the Mayor that councillors will be involved in the building of this report. So I'll be supporting option 1 for those reasons.
Thank you, Dion. Anyone else? Okay, well, I'll say a few words. I mean, my preference is for option 1. Primarily because I think, you know, the independence piece, and I kind of understand some of the issues around that. It doesn't necessarily mean you're always going to get the best result. But ultimately we're here because we have contract renewals coming up and we have to review the way we deliver these services. At the same time, we've also talked about this for a long time around this table, that we want to look at how we deliver our services. Are there different ways that we could do it? And I think people just have to be careful about constantly jumping to assumptions of how things are going to turn out before they've even happened. So forewarned is forearmed. And I think having a piece of work led by somebody with a fresh eye, sure, we could do it in-house, and Therese, I'm sure you do a great job, but it's good to have somebody with a fresh pair of eyes who can understand the terms of reference in terms of what we're looking for, looking at how we deliver our water services, which is a huge chunk of our spend. And I mean, let me remind you, we're still in the process of removing chlorine from our water because of maintenance failures. So we shouldn't be kind of too like we've got this all under control. We don't. There are huge challenges coming around water, but other issues as well, which will involve local authorities changing the way that they operate. And central government is going to drive a lot of that change. And it's our job to be as prepared as we can to have conversations with our communities about how they would like us to operate. Those communities will also have conversations with the government through the normal democratic processes. We're seeing huge shifts in the insurance market. That is something which the government might need to intervene in. It's something that local authorities might need to intervene in. So for me here, I mean, this, option 1 or 2, by the by, but I think it would be very good to just get an independent driver of this report that we then as governors consider and we make the decisions. I think having governors constantly involved in producing work just creates all kinds of conflicts and problems. So I'd much prefer a clean piece of work that we can then consider and discuss ourselves about how do we want to deliver this, what are the pros and cons, how do we want to work with our neighbours, how do we want to use our water services company in that process as well. All these things I would expect to be teased out in this report, and that's why I'm supporting option 1. Okay, Pauline, did you want to respond to any?
Thank you. And yes, I appreciate Leanne's comments saying that the status quo is not an option, and that's, as you say, forewarned is forearmed. And it doesn't have to be the option. There's always room for improvements and change. And a Section 17 review will bring us back options that we will then use to work up a model. We need to be careful of just looking at the two far ends of the spectrum, either the status quo at this end or CCO at that end. There's a myriad of options in between. In my view, option 2 includes independent members. So it's not fully internal like option 3 was in the last review. Option 2, choosing that, will enable us to come to the table with the Crown in December using our independently peer-reviewed Section 17 review with our preferred governance delivery and funding model. I feel comfortable that there's sufficient independence in option 2 to arrive at a respectful option on a model that does not have to be the status quo. And I do think we need to take into account the financial difference between option 1 and 2, and not that that is the actual pivotal decision maker, but there is a considerable difference. And I think too that the government needs to recognise the level of independence in our recommendations in delivering our services, which we will come to at the end of this process. So I do urge you to support option 2.
Thank you. Okay, well, I will put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? No. I think we'll have a division on that, please, Sam.
Okay. Councillor Keown?
I was no.
Councillor Galloway? Councillor Chen?
Yes.
Councillor Cotter?
Yes.
The man?
No.
Councillor Turner?
Yes.
Councillor Scandrett?
Yes.
Councillor Book?
Yes.
Councillor Livingston?
Yes.
Councillor East?
No.
Councillor Clearwater?
Yes.
Councillor Johansson?
Yes.
Councillor Sweets?
No.
Councillor Templeton?
No.
And Councillor Manji?
No.
That's 9
That's-
for yes and 6 for no.
Okay, that motion is carried. Thank you very much. Thanks, Teresa. Thanks, Dave.